Hello, this is Matt O'Leary, and this is a review of a new album from a band that rose up out of Oxford, England, back at the peak, at the height of stadium indie rock in both the United States and the UK. You know, the glory days of bands like Arcade Fire or Block Party. It's Foals back with Everything That Is Not Saved Will Be Lost. Part 1. Talk about a clunky title. Yep, you heard right. It's part 1, so part 2 of this double album is planned to be released in the fall. The art of the double album has really been lost in recent years, and maybe that's just because it's seen as a pretty indulgent move. And I'll admit it's pretty bold to release an album longer than 45 minutes for the consumption of Gen Z. Attention spans are dwindling. But what the hey, you know, podcasts, audiobooks are so popular right now that just bring on the double album. I actually think the way Foals is doing it here is the best way from a fan's perspective. You get twice the music, but in 2 very digestible doses. So you take the regular album cycle and you just extend it and make a full year of Foals madness. It's the same thing that Coheed did with the Afterman albums, releasing Ascension, and then I think under 6 months later releasing Descension. By, forcing this 10 to 12 song album, by packing all the good songs in one and cutting out a lot of other good material, I feel like bands sometimes sacrifice a little bit of the flow and the sequencing of an album. And that brings us to this new Foals album's greatest strength: flow and sequencing. This album ebbs and flows just about as well as any rock album of only 10 songs could. So that by the time you're done with this double punch of tracks, White Onions and In Degrees, these very upbeat, danceable tracks, then the slower Andante to sort of a marching tempo pace of Syrups is pretty refreshing. It's a short album and it leaves a little bit to be desired in that respect, but I feel like they haven't done better at pacing since 2010's Total Life Forever. And speaking of that album, Total Life Forever, I feel like there is a serious dearth of the same kind of atmosphere that they were able to create on songs like Spanish Sahara or Afterglow. The song Sunday is probably the one track where they attempt that momentous build, starting with this pretty tepid 4-chord progression and just feeling a little bit lackadaisical, but then shifting into this club beat section with this scuzzy synth and these cascading vocal snippets. I like how the song keeps up that languid pad underneath it all, which makes a pretty lukewarm chorus feel more grandiose when it comes around again at the end of the song. I think of Sundays as lazy days, and the lyrics seem to point to this general apathetic selfishness of youth in the midst of what is to Foals a near-apocalyptic period of environmental disaster. I get the sentiment, and I feel like the way they pair this sleepy, psychedelic feel with it is pretty clever. It would be all well and good if it matched the reality on the ground, but I don't feel like there's the evidence to suggest that we're nearing an apocalypse of any kind. I feel like human ingenuity will overcome whatever level of peril is upon us. There is a strong undertone of vocalist Yanis Philippakis buying into this alarmism, buying into this very strong-headed, very sanctimonious, almost doomsday cult sort of thing going on in the Western world. But moving on and getting on with the music, I think Syrups is probably the one other big epic track on the album. Even though, again, relative to some of their older stuff, like songs like A Knife in the Ocean or Inhaler, it doesn't quite reach that level of just euphoria. I do really like that cyclical, punchy bass line in the song. I feel like it's almost Ramones-like in its simplicity. And that little transition with the into the heavier driving beat, I think it's around the 3-minute mark. Really easy to miss, but it's just a heavenly little gem. It's right when the drums cut out. It's got these haunting, almost Western vocal oohs and these layered pulsating synths and these very light little guitar accents. It's an easy moment to miss, but you shouldn't, because it's absolutely friggin' gorgeous and detailed and On the Luna is another highlight for me. It's a pretty safe single, but I love all the little polyrhythms hidden into this seemingly straightforward jam. The hook is just instantaneous, and it's one of the only tracks I actually walk away with when I'm done with this thing. Kind of recently I've been listening to some albums by this Welsh kind of house and techno, electronic band Underworld. And there's a really strong tie to that brand of electronica in songs like In Degrees and Sunday. Although In Degrees feels like this blend of indie pop and electronica that a band like Yeasayer did so much more effectively and potently 10 years ago. In Degrees sounds like a song that was on the short list for the FIFA 11 soundtrack, and it didn't make the cut. Cafe d'Anthens is another track that would have felt fresh and exciting, I feel like, a decade ago. Come on. How Radiohead is this song? I mean, those lazy Tom York vocals and that snappy krautrock beat. I guess that's kind of a harsh comparison. I do really like the stuttery, fragmented and frenetic instrumentals with these smooth pads and vocals. But the vocal melody is absolutely non-existent. And this gets to my biggest criticism with this album and really all of Foals' music since the very beginning, since I'd say including Antidotes. Yannis just seems unable to produce a memorable melody to me, and some of the chord progressions just feel very, very predictable. It's the writing. Take Cafe d'Anthens or In Degrees or any of the songs I've talked about, or the opening song Moonlight. I mean, the vocal range of those melodies is absolutely minuscule. It seems like he's just wandering aimlessly. The closing track is another one like this. It's I'm done with the world and it's done with me. He takes these beautiful seventh chords and comes in with this vocal that adds absolutely nothing of melodic substance to the track. I just can't imagine them spending as much time as they did with this album in the studio and no one ever saying anything about it. Yeah, Yannis, no offense, but we maybe could spice up that vocal a little bit. If you go back in their discography, you'll find a similar thing. On Holy Fire, for instance, the number of times, the sheer amount of times that he slides down from that fifth interval is so tedious. So the song's in do 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 do. It's every time I see you. On paper, I really love all the genres they're throwing in, like the tropical, high, muted guitars, kind of math rocky, and then that atmospheric post-rock element. But this melodic ineptness and the unoriginal writing just poses them as a band perpetually stuck in the middle, not reaching the heights of bands like Everything Everything or Dutch Uncles when it comes to this frenetic art rock, not reaching the psychedelic bliss or energy of a band like Django Django, not reaching the stadium anthem glory of Elbow. But that's my opinion, and the thousands, the masses of people that come to see them at Reading or Leeds obviously feel very differently. Everything That Is Not Saved Will Be Lost is their most accessible record, I'd say. It flows well, it's very inoffensive, and it's not that memorable. So it's a meager 6 out of 10. I've heard part 2 of this album is going to be a little bit more guitar driven and heavier, kind of like some of the tracks from What Went Down. So if you like that aspect of Foals more than this electronic synth driven sound, then stay tuned, and as always, thank you so much for watching.